Hi, welcome to our daily encounter. In Isaiah, in the section that we're reading today, we have a section of scripture that I enjoy a lot. And it might seem a little bit strange that I would enjoy this section because it deals with the destruction of nations. Very powerful nations, as a matter of fact: Babylon, the Medes, Assyria, Philistia, Moab. These are nations that the people were very afraid of, very powerful and influential, but God was able to bring them down and destroy them. And it's not that I enjoy them because I like thinking about people being destroyed and brought down, but because of what it teaches us about God. It helps us to regain a proper perspective in regards to God. Because our God is a mighty God, and He is a God who enacts justice. He is a God who brings about judgment on not only individuals but on nations as well. And it is a God that we ought to respect and fear. It is a God that is spoken about in Isaiah chapter 40 as being in absolute and complete control over the nations. In Isaiah 40 and verse 15 it says, "Behold, the nations are like a drop from a bucket, and are regarded as a speck of dust on the scales. Behold, he lifts up the islands like dust, or like fine dust. Even Lebanon is not enough to burn, nor its beast enough for a burnt offering. All the nations are as nothing before him. They are regarded by him as less than nothing and meaningless." Many times I think we take too much stock in nations. Maybe in our own nation, maybe thinking that our nation is somehow completely in control of our destiny, and therefore we put so much emphasis on making sure we get the right people in the right positions, and we're so worried about getting the right policies passed and everything like that. And of course those things are important in their own right, but maybe sometimes we put too much emphasis on that and forget about the God that is far above our nation and is in way more control than any of the rulers of our nation. And it also ought to help us have the proper perspective when we think of other nations that perhaps put fear in our hearts, that we think is mighty and powerful and are able to do very dangerous things. We got to also remember that God is even over those nations as well, and that He is in ultimate control over the world events and things that are going on. But there's something else that we can learn from this section as well, because as we read it, we basically see two distinct things that God is bringing judgment on the nations for. One is for pride, and the other is for sin. And these are things that the Lord just cannot stand. He really does not like a prideful disposition in a person, nor does He like sin, obviously. And so He brings destruction on these nations to basically work out these two things out of them. One to humble, and then the other to draw out sin. One instance where this is brought out in regards to pride is with Babylon, where he says in verse 13, "You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven, I will raise my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mount of assembly in the recesses of the north." And then he would go on to say that how, in verse 22, "I will rise up against them, declares the Lord of hosts, and I will cut off from Babylon name and survivors, offspring and posterity, declares the Lord." So God was going to bring them down from that lofty thinking, that prideful state, and He was even going to bring them down to the point of never being raised up again. And so God utterly took away the pride of Babylon. But He also dealt with the sin of Israel, particularly Damascus, where they were involved in idol worship and doing things contrary to God, and He had to bring judgment upon them, which would bring about really a new regard for God and for desiring Him once again, and going back to righteousness again. And so in our own lives, we can kind of expect God to work very distinctly and very powerfully against us when we begin to have these things in our hearts. When we begin, one, to either become very, very sinful and begin to rebel against Him, He has to sometimes deal with us. Maybe sometimes in a very harsh way to get us to wake up and to get out of that sin. But sometimes we may not be involved in sin in a way that we think about sin, but we might become very prideful in ourselves, which really, in essence, pride is a sin itself. But we might become prideful in thinking that we are righteous because we don't have the sins that other people have. And so God has to deal with us to humble us and to break us and to empty us of that pride so we can have a proper perspective in regards to ourselves and to Him as well. And so this is a God that we serve, and a God that we should respect, revere, fear, and give Him the proper place in our lives, because He is a mighty and powerful and awesome God. Yes, He is full of compassion and mercy and grace, but at the same time we don't want to test Him. We don't want to test Him or take advantage of the grace and the mercy given to us, but to live before Him in righteousness and obedience and being aligned to His will for our lives, so that we can enjoy the blessing of being connected to and in a relationship with such a powerful and mighty God. Well, I thank you guys for listening in today. I love you guys. Hope you guys have a great day. God bless.